Hello and welcome to the first part of this tutorial. In this part we will be creating our rainy scene. So to begin with you will need to open the 00 rainy scene file, and once you've got that open we're going to composition, new composition.
We'll call it rain scene.
We'll be using the 1920 1080 preset with the 25 frames per second for me. If you want to use a different frame rate, go ahead. The duration we'll need though will have to be about 20 seconds. Okay, once you've got the rainy scene, drag it into the render comps folder. Next thing we need to do is go inside the images folder, go to other and grab the ground texture and drag that into the composition. Alright, so now that we're here, let's turn that layer 3D by clicking the little cube. The very next thing we need to do is create a camera, so go to Layer, New, Camera. The 24mm preset is the one we're going to use here, click OK. Go to the ground layer texture and hit P for position and drag the Z all the way back so we'll start seeing the edges here. We don't want to go too far back though because you'll start seeing what's behind the image. So the next thing we need to do here is start making it look a little bit darker and a bit wet. So first thing we'll do is grab levels, so come up to the effects and presets panel and start typing in levels. With the layer selected you can either just double click the levels effect and it will automatically add to your layer, or you can just drag it down. It doesn't really make too much difference. What we're going to do here is grab this point and drag it to the right. As you can see it starts to become a bit darker. We want to go about 87, 90, yeah 90 will do. We'll leave these as they are, not changing any of those for now. So the next thing we need to do is make it look like there's water on the surface here, and we can do that with the drizzle effect. So in your effects and presets area again, start typing in drizzle. You should see it here, click it and grab it and chuck it on the layer. As you can see it's already starting to give us some kind of bubbling on there. We want this to start sort of less bubbly and gradually build up over a period of at least a second. So with the current time indicator at the beginning of the composition, let's go for the drip rate of a 1 and let's go ahead to about 1 second and turn that up to 10. Now you see a lot more of what's going on. So what it will be like is that it starts raining and eventually it just gets heavier, and that's when our bubbling will get a bit more active. I want to see these bubbles for a little longer though, so we can go to the longevity and we can put that to 3 seconds I think. Yeah, that works for me. And let's collapse the levels. So the light settings is set to point light. So yeah, it comes around here and we'll take down the light intensity a bit, maybe about 50%. So it's not like a massive overbearing light, probably like a street light we want to create the illusion of. And let's take a look at the displacement and let's move that to about 30. So the displacement is going to make it look like there's water here, and it's going to distort what's ever underneath it. So let's also look at the rippling angle. So we can change that, I reckon, well it's not essential, but I'm going to put it at about 30 because I like the angles that the light's hitting it at. Anyway, the next thing we want to do is change the colour slightly. We don't want this to be a perfect white, so maybe let's take this down to a slightly off grey. off grey kind of white. Alright, so that's all we need to do with the rippling effect for now. But it still looks a bit too bright, the image, and what we're going to do to fix that is create a vignette layer. So we can either hit the shortcut you just saw on your screen, or you can come up and select Layer, New, Solid. Okay, so this needs to be black, and let's label it Vignette. And, well, is that how you spell it? Well, you know what I mean. Let's zoom out to about 50%. We'll select the ellipse mask tool, and with the vignette layer selected, let's drag around not quite the whole image. You want to be leaving about a gap of at least this much. And let's go back in about 100%, and that way you can see what we're doing here a bit better. Now let's invert that here, and with the layer selected still, press F to see the feathering, and let's bring that way up to create this kind of shadowing going on here. Okay, I don't think these should be so symmetrical, so I'm just going to adjust these a little bit. Yeah, I think this will do for now. Okay, the next thing I want to do is show you one of the filters that I've been using. And once that's made, you can save it as a preset to use on any project afterwards. But to do that, we need to create an adjustment layer. So go to Layer, New, Adjustment Layer. If you're someone new to After Effects and not sure what an adjustment layer is, it's basically a layer that we create and we can apply effects to, and it will adjust everything that's below it. I actually just want this layer to be above the ground layer for now, so let's drag it down here, and also let's rename that to be Filter. So with the filter layer selected, I want to add an effect called Photo Filter. So apply Photo Filter to the layer, and let's go to the settings and we'll select Cooling 80. The next effect we're adding here is the Curves effect. So with the Curves effect, I want to make it still a little bit darker. We don't want it to be too warm, still maybe a touch of heat there. You'll see what it does. Add a bit of cooling to your scene. Whichever way you want to go. I mean, I want it to be cold looking. If you want it to be a bit warmer, you're free to move this a bit higher. So after the curves adjustment, I want to add tint. Let's turn this to about 30%, I think. And let's tint this another cooling shade of blue. Just a slightly off-white to blue. It'll probably look like it's not making much of a difference at the moment, but if you just turn them off and on again, it's just a subtle hint. I think it just gives that extra kind of cooling atmosphere. Okay, so the next thing we want to add here is color balance. So color balance, I'm just going to add in some figures here, and you should just follow along. So for the red, I'm going to leave that as it is. For the green balance, we'll have 9. For the blue balance, 23. For the red mid-tone, I'm going to have 2. For the green balance, 3. For the mid-tone blue, I want to have that as -5. The highlight red balance, 5. For the green balance, 6. And blue, let's have that at 20. So if I take it off, again you see it's quite subtle. But if I take them all off, you see what kind of difference it makes to the scene. So to keep this as an effect for other projects, just select all the effects and drag them over here to your effects and presets panel, just over animation presets, and then you can save it as whatever name you want. I'm just going to leave it as the filter adjustment layer for now. Okay, so moving on from here, let's grab our video asset, the lens flare video. One of the things I've done in the past is a little bit of filming, and this is something we shot, and I've used it many times before since. It was actually a mistake. I didn't even realize the camera was still on, and it's turned out to be quite useful. So bring this to the top of your layers, and let's right click and go to time, enable time remapping. As you can see at the moment, the layer's just not long enough here, and what we want to do is make it last the entirety of the composition. So drag the end of the layer and drag it to the end of the composition, and then grab the keyframe and drag it to the end also. It doesn't really matter now that it's going to be a little bit jerky, because what we're going to do is change the blend mode to screen. So you can see now what effect this has on our scene. Let's zoom in a bit more so you can see what's going on. What I want to create here is the impression that there's a police car somewhere here on the right hand side of our scene, and this is just the police light filtering into our scene. But I don't want this to totally affect the entire frame of our scene. If you want to, you should feel free to make that creative decision. That's your call. But what I'm going to do is, with this layer selected, I'm going to grab the mask tool and I'm going to drag at least half of it, and then I'm going to hit F for feather to gradually fade it in. I want it to not be too overbearing. I just want it to influence the scene just partially, not fully. So for example, if I take the mask off now, you can see it takes over the whole scene really. We just want to have part of it. It doesn't need to be the whole thing. Might take the transparency down a little bit. It just doesn't need to be totally strong. We might adjust some of our decisions here if we need to, but for now I think we should just leave this like it is. So the next thing we're going to add here is some rain, and for that we're going to be using Particle World, which is the plugin that's already included in After Effects. So let's create a new solid. For this I'm going to use the shortcut Command Y on Mac, Control Y on PC I believe, and we'll call it Rain. For anyone who prefers not to use shortcuts, that's Layer, New, Solid. So with the layer selected, let's type in Particle, and then select Particle World and drag that over, and then let's solo that layer so we only see the particle. The first thing we want to do is change the birth rate. At the moment it's just 2. We're going to need quite a bit more rain I think, so let's go to 250. This isn't what we're looking for just yet, but bear with me. So for longevity, let's turn that to 2. We want our rain to be visible for quite some time. We want to be able to see it come past our camera and drop down into the scene below. Let's go for the physics next, so that way you can have a clear idea of what I'm talking about when I say we want these to come past the camera. Okay, I want to adjust the gravity next, and let's pull this down to 0.001, so it's very low. And this way it will look like it's kind of exploding in our face. Alright, so let's go to the producer and the producer position. We want this to be back towards our camera, so drag it back, back, back. Maybe about minus 1.5. Whoops, not 150. Minus 1.5. So for the particle, I quite like the fader sphere, because I think it looks more like an out of focus droplet compared to the harsh line. I'm going to be using both though, but I'm going to get this one done first. In the particle, we also need to change the birth colour and the death colour, because at the moment you can see it starts off as this yellow and then turns red just before it dies. Let's go for white for the birth colour, and let's go for grey for the death colour. Let's unsolo that and go back to our scene so we can have a look at where we are so far. As you can see, it's kind of rainish. I think there are just a few things we need to change here. So let's go back and isolate that layer. So with the rain still selected, let's go back to the physics and go to the velocity, and let's change that to 2 to give us more rain to look at. Okay, so let's have a look, and looking at that we can see it's a bit too much. So let's go back to the particle, because I think this is the depth size that we need to adjust here. We want to create the illusion that as the rain passes us, it's going to be falling further away from us, so it will be actually getting smaller. So let's change the depth size to be 0.05. Yeah, that's looking better already. Yeah, you might think this is starting to look a bit like snow. I think they look a bit like big water droplets, and we'll add the other particle type in a copied layer anyway, and the variation I think will help us achieve the look we're going for. The size variation is another thing I think we should change, and I think we should increase that to say 70. And the maximum opacity, let's take that down to 55. I just want to test the birth rate at a lower value now as well actually. Let's say 150. Yeah, I think that's looking better actually. I think a little less rain is actually looking better. So another thing I want to do is add another rain type. I think this kind will look a bit more like the lines that you typically associate with rain. So let's go to the rain layer. Let's duplicate that with Command D. And let's go to the birth rate, and for that, let's say 70. Let's go to the particle and choose line. Let's solo that layer and have a look at what we've got here. Okay, still a bit too much going on there, so let's go to longevity and let's have 1. Now let's have a look at what those look like together. For me now, that's still a little bit too sharp, so one way around that is to add a blur to it. Go to your effects and presets panel and start typing Gaussian blur. Let's rename the copy to Rain 2 and apply the Gaussian blur here. Turn the blurriness up a bit. Yeah, I think that looks good to me. So I think we've got our scene here now, and I don't think we need to add anything more just yet. So for now I'm going to conclude that right there, and I'll see you in the next part.